We're going to practice factoring type 2 trinomials. A type 2 trinomial looks like ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is not 1. So for this type of trinomial, we have a leading coefficient that is not 1. An example of that is this trinomial here. My leading coefficient is 2. So when our leading coefficient is not 1, we can't use our same trick that we use for type 1 trinomials. There are a little more steps involved. So when we factor a type 2 trinomial, our first step is to multiply a and c. So I'm going to multiply 2 and 3, and I'm going to get 6. My next step, I'm going to look at factors of 6, that product that I came up with, that have a sum of b, which is -7. So my first two steps, I multiply a and c, then I'm looking for factors of that product that have a sum of b. So with type 1 and type 2 trinomials, the sum that you're looking for is always b. So that can hopefully help you remember which one you're looking for factors of, and it's always the sum of b. So if I need a negative sum, the two factors I'll be looking for are both negative. So I'm going to do -1 and -6 first. And once you know it, those are the two factors I'm looking for. So now I take my two factors and I'm going to rewrite my polynomial. I need to take my two factors and split up my middle term. So I'm going to have 2x squared, and I'm going to rewrite -7x as -6x minus 1x. This is still equivalent. If I were to combine these like terms, I'd end up with -7x. All I'm doing is writing it so that it's two separate terms, so that now I can factor by grouping. What I've done is I've turned my type 2 trinomial into an equivalent polynomial with 4 terms, so that I can now factor by grouping. When I factor by grouping, I'm going to look just at my first grouping and ask myself what's their common factor, and in this case it's 2x. When I factor that out, I get x minus 3. Here I have -x plus 3. I want the exact same thing in parentheses here that I have over here. If you'll notice, this is -x, this is +x, +3, -3. I need opposite signs from what I have, so I'm going to factor out a -1. -1 times +x gives me that -x. -1 times -3 gives me that +3. So now I'm going to look at my two terms. I have a common factor of x minus 3, and what's left is 2x minus 1. So this is your final answer for writing this polynomial in fully factored form. I know that I'm fully factored because when I look at my two factors, neither of them have a common factor greater than 1. When I look at this, x minus 3, their greatest common factor is 1. When I look at 2x minus 1, their greatest common factor is also 1, so I know I'm fully factored. Let's look at one where a is negative. So I have -5x squared plus 7x minus 2. So if you remember from class, we said that a cannot be negative. If a is negative, I need to factor out a -1 first. So when I do that, I'll have -1 times the quantity of 5x squared minus 7x plus 2. So now I cannot lose my -1. My -1 stays there the entire time. Otherwise, I would not end up with an equivalent factored form to my polynomial. Okay? So now I'm going to look just within inside my parentheses, and I'm going to factor this trinomial. So my first step to doing so is multiplying a and c. So I have 5 times 2. That gives me 10. So now I'm looking at factors of that product. So factors of 10 that have a sum of b. So my b was originally positive 7, but now that I've factored out my negative 1, I'm looking at negative 7. So remember, always factors of this product that have a sum of b. It's always a sum of b, whether you're talking about type 1 or type 2 trinomials. So I have negative 1, negative 10. That sum is negative 11. That's not going to work. I have negative 2, negative 5. Their sum is negative 7. That works. I found the two factors that I need. So now my third step is to rewrite my polynomial. Not going to forget my negative sign that I factored out. So this is the polynomial I have right now. I'm going to take my middle term, minus 7x, and I'm going to write it as two terms. It's going to be equal, but my goal is to get this trinomial into a 4-term polynomial, because that I can easily factor by grouping. So I have negative 1 times 5x squared, and I'm going to break my negative 7x into minus 2x and minus 5x. It does not matter which order you write them in. You could write it in this order, or you could have written minus 2x minus 5x. Either way, you'll end up with the same factored form in the end. Now that I've done this step, I'm going to factor by grouping. So when I do, I still have my negative 1 out here. Within this grouping, 5x squared and minus 5x, my common factor is 5x. When I take that out, I'm left with x minus 1. So this piece right here came from factoring out the greatest common factor into that first group. So that's how I got this piece. Now I'm going to look at my second grouping. I have negative 2x plus 2. Well, I know that their common factor is 2. If I factor out a positive 2, I'll be left with negative x plus 1. But now, inside my parentheses, I have opposite signs. So I need this to be a positive x and this to be a negative 1. So instead of factoring out a positive 2, I'm going to factor out a negative 2. Negative 2x is the same as negative 2 times positive x. And positive 2 is negative 2 times negative 1. So now, this looks really complicated, but if you look at it piece by piece, you'll see where we got everything from. This right here, I got from factoring out the greatest common factor in my first grouping. This right here, I got this piece from factoring out my greatest common factor in my second grouping. And the whole time, everything is being multiplied by negative 1 because I factored that out in the beginning and I cannot lose it. It does not go away. All I'm doing is factoring. I'm just setting it aside for right now. So now, my common term, my common factor in my two terms is x minus 1. And what's left is 5x minus 2, and I'm still being multiplied by negative 1. This is your final answer when you are asked to factor this type 2 trinomial. I still have my negative 1 out here. If I look just at this factor, x minus 1, their greatest common factor is 1, so I can't pull anything else out. When I look at this factor, 5x minus 2, their greatest common factor is also 1, so I know that I'm fully factored, which is great. And that's how you factor type 2 trinomials.